So, welcome to Level Up TV at levelupyourgame.net and /leveluptv at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Go subscribe, follow, like, etc. Welcome to Level Up TV's regular Quake Live TDM show, EuroCup Weekly, with myself, Disrepute, and Vor, represented by Alligator below. He can't afford a webcam. Budget constraints.
Budget constraints are a big issue these days in Quake Dis.
They definitely are. We're discussing just the things that are going on in the tournament. Obviously, the highs, the lows, the epic fails. And of course, this week it saw the culmination of the group stages. So we'll be discussing them and summing up all those games, talking about the highlights and our key players of the tournament so far. And we'll be moving on into talking about what's going to happen in the playoffs. So without further ado, I think we should probably just get on with it and start off with all the games that, we covered them all. There's 8 of them, and we're going to talk about them. Just a little overview, one by one in chronological order. So, to start off with, Team Mammoth versus Sitovor.
Yeah, I mean, final game of a disappointing competition for Mammoth, wasn't it? They had potential to do better than they've done this season, but it hasn't been a great season for them. Particular low point, was them forfeiting a map, which was a bit of a shame in one of their earlier games. But dominant performance by Sito, as everyone would have probably expected in this fixture.
Yeah, impressive performances by Sito, of course, throughout this competition, leading them to qualify through the group undefeated, not even dropping a single map. And they were last year's finalists. They lost it just by one map, let's remember. So they've kept up their form since last season.
Definitely, and they're looking for revenge this year. This will be, well, I say year, this season. It will be their season, perhaps.
Perhaps. And if it goes my way, because I predicted them, and so I thus now support them, we'll be getting it. Right, great. So my browser's just going really slow and is lagged. Okay, well, anyway, we'll just talk about the next game. Play vs Sky? Skywalkers? Was that the next game?
Yes, it was.
Yep, Skywalkers versus Play, there it is. That was, again, a 2-0 there. Skywalkers, am I right in saying, didn't win a map?
I believe so. A bit of a disappointing season for them, perhaps. But again, it's their first season in EuroCup, so they won't have expected to be potential qualifiers or anything. I'm sure they'd have loved to try and pick up a map, but wasn't to be this season. Pretty dominant performance from Play in this final game of the group for them. I mean, disappointing season for Play as well. We had high expectations of what they might be able to achieve, but they aren't going to make it out of the groups themselves. But they finished off the season with, a 71 frag win and then a mercy limit win.
That is the kind of thing we were predicting before the tournament that they could do, and they could really challenge the top teams. So it's a shame for them that they could only really produce it in that final game. And maybe if the fixtures were reversed and they'd got off to this good start, we might have seen a different season from Play.
But yeah, they were just coming up short against the better teams, and when they lost to Plan B, that was probably already the confirmation that they weren't going to be making it out of the group.
Well, actually, the final games for both Sito and Play were against each other, weren't they? Because that's what this match is. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Sito taking it 2-0, but it was a lot closer, the game. I mean, I'd say Purgatory was relatively close, 169, 144. Didn't feel as close on Terminus. It's just the styles of the maps, I guess.
Yeah, Terminus, it was really a lot of weird power-up decisions from Play on Terminus that potentially could have costed them that game. I'm not sure it would have been, the absolute difference, but their power-up play was certainly a problem for them. And Zyrinx in particular played an amazing game on Purgatory as well, which was a huge difference between the teams on that map. I mean, everyone on Sito, other than Zyrinx, actually with negative nets on Purgatory. So, outstanding performance from Zyrinx, and he's one of the players that are looking very strong in this competition going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a key tactic there that they're playing is to stack him up and make him do the big jobs, pick up the frags, and do the power-ups when he can, etc. But, he has to rise up to that challenge. If you asked me to do that, I wouldn't necessarily be able to do it.
Yeah, they trust him with that role as well. It's important because he's so consistent.
These were the
If
final.
he was regularly losing them games, perhaps they would think about how they were playing.
Yeah, I know I'd be worried if he was, if that was their tactics and he was losing them all their games. I'd kind of question it, but they have exceeded perhaps even our expectations of them. Not even dropping a map is a pretty incredible record.
Yeah, 10-0 in the group stage on maps.
I've never seen it
That's,
before. I've never ever seen that before.
no, and that certainly, I think, shifts them to definite favourites, perhaps, for the competition overall now, with just how well they've played in the groups.
Moving on then to the final set of group games that were played this week, we had Unknown versus Plan B. We'll talk about that in a bit, I think. Lemmings Effect versus Lowfly. That was 2-0.
Yeah, and that's quite a big result for Lemmings Effect. I mean, Lowfly have looked quite good in this competition so far, and to take them out 2-0, certainly a good statement of intent and just gives some indication of how far Lemmings Effect have come and could go in this competition. Straight into the semi-final now as group winners, and they are looking, so impressive in this competition.
It's strange because Lowfly had such a good start to the group stage. We thought, well, they look like favourites to top the group, taking out Deliberate Murder. But then they had a month where they didn't schedule and play any of their games. So I think they were going into this a bit cold. We even see their map pick. They got beaten more heavily on than Lemmings Effect's map pick, which they have looked dominant on, Purgatory. And that wasn't, that wasn't a massive win. That was quite a close game between the two on that.
Yeah, it was about a 15 frag win for Lemmings Effect on Purgatory, and that's as close as anyone's come to taking that map off them. It's just, not quite enough for Lowfly, and the defeat they had on Dreadful Place, I think they'll be very disappointed that it was such a decisive victory.
102 versus Action Legion, which we just watched. We'll talk about that again in a minute, I think. And Lemmings Effect versus Action Legion. This was a map dropped by Lemmings Effect, who obviously won their group by winning every game. But as we've just seen earlier tonight with the Action versus Deliberate Murder game, Action are perhaps underperformed against Deliberate Murder because they were managed to take a map, as I say, off Lemmings Effect.
Yeah, it was a very close map though. I mean, it was their map pick that they won, Hidden Fortress, but they only won it by about 10 frags, and I don't know. It's not a convincing victory, not for a team like Action, who in the past on Hidden Fortress have looked, one of the absolute best teams on that map, and we're used to smashing even good teams on Hidden Fortress.
Yeah, I think Action's kind of play is very expansive and aggressive. Generally speaking, those kind of maps suit them more, which is maybe why when you clash against somebody who's kind of similar to you, like Lemmings Effect or Deliberate Murder, it's going to be a more difficult game. And if you're not quite in form, then you're gonna have a hard time. Then we saw Purgatory, and the final map decided, Dreadful Place, again a close affair, and things could have really gone the way of Action there, and could have seen them qualify. So, it's been pretty close to them getting through.
Well, I don't believe they would have qualified even if they won this game, because on head-to-head they'd lost to both Lowfly and Deliberate Murder at this stage, so they weren't actually having any chance to qualify.
Then we saw the final group stage match, Lowfly versus the Czechs. A comment on that? I mean, the Czech season, Vor.
Well, they didn't bring their A team for this final game for them in the group. No Chrissa, no Detour. When you take those two players out of that team, they're very, very strong with those two players, and they just don't have anyone really that can match up and replace those. I mean, no one can replace Chrissa really on any team. So he's such a huge loss for them, and I kind of think it's not that surprising. The result we saw against Lowfly because of that. destroyed on Dreadful Place in less than 5 minutes. It was a reduced mercy limit by only 50
It would
frags,
have
the
gone
mercy
mercy
limit.
limit anyway.
Yeah, regardless, there's no way they'd have been able to stave off the mercy limit in that game. And, intervention, they recovered that because after the first map, anything could have happened, and they lost that by 40 frags, which
Bit
is
of
not too bad
pride.
a showing.
Bit of
But,
pride restored, yeah.
disappointing season for them because having performed so well at LAN with their normal lineup, you'd have expected them to do better online. And even when Crystal was available for them, they really didn't show much this season.
And the Czechs have
They,
been around for a long time for. I mean, as a
losing
nations team,
all 5 games, I would never have even considered that would have happened. I thought they'd have been able to pick up 2 wins potentially at a bare minimum in a bad season and have the chance to qualify.
yeah. So, I mean, that leads us into the end of the group. So let's just go back and discuss what we've marked down as what we feel the key games were. And they came in this last evening of games. The first one was the Group A game, the final game of Group A. Group A got their stuff together, sorted it out early, and they only had one game to play on the last night, and that was Plan B versus Unknown. This was going to be a decider of who came second and who came third. Unknown, a lot of people would have tipped them as being favourites throughout the tournament. I mean, when you've got a lineup of Deus, Wins, Gerper, Hazard, and Lincoln to choose from, that's as all-star as you can pretty much get, isn't it?
Well, exactly. It's a very strong pool of players to pick from, and whichever combination of those players they use, you'd always expect them to be quite dominant. Hasn't really been the case this season though, and they ended up in this game against Plan B. This was a decider for who came second, and potentially that's quite important because you come second in Group A, you're going to play the team that places third in Group B, so you should be gaining some kind of advantage from that. You'd expect. And made this a very important game.
Interestingly, again, perhaps we're going to highlight the weakness of Unknown is going to be on the newer maps, Terminus and especially Limbus. Their experience with Limbus this season has been, 3 times they've played it, and
Yeah, they're
3 times they've
0-3.
lost it. Yeah, that's not a good stat. The first time they actually defaulted it, and the second 2 they've lost, although getting better on it, you must admit, but slowly. We'll say slowly because they still lost fairly convincingly.
They put in a better performance on Olympus this time, and looking ahead to the playoffs, they're going to have to continue that improvement curve because as we'll discuss later, the format will change for the playoffs and will make them very vulnerable if they can't.
The second map was Hidden Fortress.
Yeah, it was a very close Hidden Fortress as well. It was one of those ones that goes down until the final couple of minutes, and just who's got the crucial moments in their favour, is going to decide those. And it was Unknown. They did take it by just 10 frags though, which is perhaps quite unexpected given their lineup. Against any team, you'd expect them to be able to win comfortably.
Yeah, the aim power they've got on that team it should just be dominant, but really didn't work out that way, and it just shows that Hidden Fortress has an element of core team play that.
Yeah, and it shows just how good a team Plan B are proving to be in this competition as well.
They are not weak aimers themselves, so
certainly not. But compared to Unknown, you still tip the favour towards Unknown.
That's a really good VOD as well. So when we get that up, I don't think I've cut that VOD yet. When that goes up on YouTube, if you haven't already seen it, that is a good watch, that map. There's some crazy moments there. Quad kills, things like that. It is a really good game. And then, I mean, it's fair to say this is probably an example of what Unknown are capable of. Dreadful Place, third map. Plan B, they're a strong team on every map. Dreadful Place, no exception. They're a good coordinated team. And it started off a pretty close game but, well.
Well, as it progressed, I believe Unknown were behind on Dreadful Place. And when they tied the game up, from then they just didn't look back because they started to carve Plan B apart. And, it was more like what we expected to see earlier in the competition from Unknown. But we're finally seeing what they're capable of, in particular in this game. Deuce and Wins, I think they're going to be invaluable players in the playoffs. They really need to try and have Deuce available. because they showed what they're capable of, and they're both such good players, and they were perhaps the difference between themselves and Plan B in the end.
Deuce really stepped up for that final map, especially because he's completely inactive pretty much. He never plays. It just shows his world-class ability to just step in there and really help win the game. But the other key game we just watched it, 102 versus Action League, and we've already sort of summarised that really. But the key thing is here, the loser of this was going to be eliminated from the competition.
Yeah, indeed, because if Action had beaten 102, then that would have put 102 on 3 losses, and Action would have gone through. But obviously, 102 winning just cemented their place, because regardless of what Action did in their final game against Lemmings Effect, they couldn't then go through due to the fact that their head-to-head against both 102 and Lowfly, was them in the loser position.
It was all in their hands this evening. That evening, Action. If they'd won this game and then won against Lemming Effect, they'd be in second place. But instead, because they lost this game, this one game, they were out of the competition.
Yeah, I believe under some permutations that Action actually could have afforded to lose against Lemmings Effect regardless, as long as they beat 102.
Yeah. But it didn't happen, and your reigning champions are still in the competition.
Yeah, who'd have thought, though, that we'd have been talking about 102 just barely making it out of the group stages when this season started? It was expected from the start that 102 would comfortably go through. You would have expected them to go through as comfortably as teams like Sito and Lemmings Effect, but hasn't proven to be the case at all. Perhaps, though, they are starting to regain some form at a crucial time.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. So let's move on to, as I just play the Sito versus player On Terminus video, because, you might be seeing a little bit more of this map as it comes on. But let's get on to who you've picked as your team of the week for. The previous week we had Sito, and I think before that we had Lowfly. So who's going to be your team of the week this week?
Team of the week, undoubtedly for me this week, is Lemmings Effect, mainly because the 2 wins they had, Action and Lowfly, those are 2 of the toughest teams in Group B, and they came through it. That's a big test for Lemmings Effect and just how good they are. They passed it. They looked pretty comfortable in both games. It was close games against Action, but they still came through that and proved that they are looking so strong in this competition. It's a great finish for them in the group stages heading into the playoff. They are going to be sat waiting in the semi-final, but they're going to be very confident.
No doubt they will practice and be prepared for that quarter-final finalist in the semi-final anyway. And there's other options for teams. You could say Deliberate Murder. They got that key victory. They needed it, and they did manage to get it to qualify. They had some poor form. We saw them in the Russian Cup, where they lost to a Russian mixed team. They really weren't performing well, but they did get the win against Action. So you could potentially have some of their teams, but really you have to go for the team that won every match in Group A and Group B.
Sito, they won both their games as well this week, but I think Lemmings Effect, they had the tougher games and was slightly, as a result, that's slightly more impressive than beating a mammoth side that hasn't shown much in this competition and a play team that have disappointed. So Lemmings Effect, I think, team of the week.
And then, okay, let's move on. Let's give your special award for player of the week for. We saw a lot of good games, saw some brilliant moments from many quality individuals and good team play as well across the board. But who stood out for you? Who was the main man in this last week?
Well, it's a member of Lemmings Effect for me for similar reasons. Performing well against 2 strong teams, and that would be Kinko. He had great performance against both Action and Lowfly, constantly dealing out great damage with such solid aim. All the crucial shots he seems to make, and can't ask for much more than a player in a close game like that to make sure he just hits everything he needs to help his team. And going into the playoffs, if he can maintain his current level, and then Lemmings Effect will be looking very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the guy that takes all the plaudits either. He's not like the hyped individual of their team or of other teams in the tournament. I mean, he kind of flies under the radar and yet does the same job as anybody else on his team who's considered to have done an amazing job, and he does it consistently. So I've been really impressed by Kinko.
Yeah, and it's not always easy for someone to stand out in Lemmings Effect because they all play such a good game usually. It's not like Sito sometimes where it's clearly Zyrink's the star man on many occasions. Quite often from Lemmings Effect, it's very even across the board in terms of performance, and so it's hard to stand out on a team like that. But he was very strong in both games, both against Action and Low Fly.
I think we both agree on that one. So that moves us into the knockout stages, and there is some certain rules that we need to highlight. I guess going into those, it's now a best of 5 series. You still got the 7 maps to select from, but you'll be choosing 2 of those maps. There's also no elimination of the maps. I mean, how's that going to affect teams? Both of those changes in rules for the
Oh,
players.
that's going to be huge that teams can no longer drop maps because this now exposes some teams on a map like Terminus. Terminus has been dropped by, I'd say, more than half of the clans in this competition so far have been unwilling to play it and so have just automatically dropped it without thinking. Well, that is no longer an option on the table for those teams, and they could be exposed because of it.
And of
And
course,
it's a real big handicap, you have to say, going into tight knockout games in the playoffs where you are basically giving up a map, effectively, in some cases.
yeah, they got a nice system for the way the map order is. Coin toss, loser picks the second map the loser picks, and then the coin toss winner picks the first map. So that's the order in which they pick them. So the coin toss gets the advantage of their map first, and then but they also get to pick it second. Then the coin toss loser picks the 4th map, and then the coin toss winner picks the 3rd map. There's a big advantage there, I'd probably say, by winning the coin toss. You get to play both your maps first, and the coin toss loser shows you their hand first. But
Well, the coin toss loser will have a lot of pressure on them because, they get to pick. So, what do they get to pick again? Yeah,
the
I've had
second
it.
and 4th maps,
Yeah, so it could be, you could put yourself in a lot of trouble if you don't win that second map
your map.
as the coin toss loser. So, coin tosses, they're not going to really decide the outcome as such, but they're going to be very important nonetheless.
I mean, it's a dangerous situation picking maps anyway, because everybody's pretty much good at all maps now, apart from these brand new maps, Limbus and Terminus, which seem to catch some teams out. But the other maps, everybody's got experience on, so it's going to be difficult to gain a massive advantage with your map pick.
Yeah, and that's where I think, looking to the actual games, that Unknown have really dodged a bullet because they're facing up against Deliberate Murder.
If we go to the games
Now, if they were playing Low Fly, then I can imagine a scenario where Low Fly pick Terminus and Limbus,
yeah,
and that puts Unknown in a really dangerous position.
that's almost like saying you're going to start this match 2-0 down.
Yeah, I mean, there's no guarantees, of course. Unknown
Yeah.
could take Limbus, but I think the chances of them having even seen Terminus, some of them, especially, let's say, Deuce, are very unlikely.
Wow,
and
Deuce is not going to like that map. I would
no,
just not even
and
bother playing him on
I
it.
think they're very fortunate that they're playing Deliberate Murder, because I'm not sure that Deliberate Murder will have much interest in playing Terminus themselves.
Yeah, I don't think they want
Limbus,
to
on the
pick
other
it.
hand, I can definitely see Deliberate Murder picking Limbus.
I can see that as well. So the 2 matches are in these quarterfinals: Low Fly versus Plan B. The winner will play Sito, and Deliberate Murder versus Unknown. The winner will play Lemmings Effect. This is an extremely interesting draw. Of those 2 matches, 2 quarterfinals for which ones interest you the most? Which one's the highlight?
Of the quarterfinals?
Yeah,
Well, in terms of the big name matchup, I think it's Unknown versus Deliberate Murder.
yeah.
last season's finalists against potentially one of the best lineups that the competition has.
on
And
paper.
I think it's hard to pick a winner because, up until their game against Action, Deliberate Murder was starting to falter slightly and not look at their best.
Yeah.
But Unknown haven't been strong themselves, so hard to pick a winner. It's going to be a very interesting game.
Low fly versus Plan B. I mean, to me, there's a difference between the styles of players. Well, Unknown and 102 are not dissimilar in their play style, and neither are necessarily low fly and Plan B. I'd say out of the rest of the whole competition, though, the best sort of counter attackers are low fly. A lot of the teams will try and dominate you with their style, whereas low fly are a bit more adaptive. I think they kind of adapt to their opponent's play style and turn it against them as such. And you've got to be wise when you're playing against a team like that and not letting them do that.
Yeah, we saw that specifically against Deliberate Murder when kind of a shock result, but not, totally unbelievable shock because they are good players.
So then we go on to the semi-finals. I mean, do we want to make predictions now about who you think might win these quarterfinals and meet in the semis?
Um, yeah, I will predict that Low Fly and Plan B. It's hard to say,
It's
but
difficult.
I can see it either being a 4 or 5 mapper, but with Low Fly coming out on top.
And they'd be playing Sito. And then for 102 versus Unknown.
Yeah, again, hard to call it, but I think it's more likely to be a 4 mapper. And I'm going to say 102 to just slightly edge it. I'm expecting close games, but hard to call.
So that would leave Sito versus Low Fly, and I'm predicting Sito to win it from the very start of this competition, so I expect them to win that.
On form,
Can't be
it certainly
blasé
suggests
about
so.
it, but we'll see. And then the other semi-final, which would be Deliberate Murder versus Lemmings Effect. Wow, that is a interesting rematch from the group stages, isn't it? It'd be a hard one to call.
It would.
I'm not even going to call it. I'm not going to call any of the games, actually. I still don't know, as long as Sito win and I'm proven correct. So anyway, we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games remaining. That's the 2 quarterfinals, 2 semi-finals, the grand final, and the third place playoff. We've got all of those coming starting next week. I think next Wednesday we've already got the 102 versus Unknown game scheduled. I think. I have to check on that, but I think the 2 quarterfinals will be next week, and then the semi-finals probably follow the week after, and then maybe the final the week after that, something like that. We'll keep you up to date anyway on our Facebook, on our Twitter. So check out those. Like us on Facebook /LevelUpTV. Follow us on Twitter @LevelUpTV. Just actually being messaged by Vision. Okay, 102 versus Unknown will be played in December. So maybe got a couple of weeks. We'll see. We'll see when the games are up anyway. But until then, Vor, I think it's time to say goodbye from another EuroCup Weekly show. Say goodbye, Vor.
Goodbye, everybody, and I hope you join us for the knockout stages.